Today, I want to talk about the women whose lives have been inextricably affected and unraveled by Jeffrey Epstein and Donald Trump. And then I want to focus on one particular court case that was filed by a plaintiff who alleges that both Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein raped her when she was only 13 years of age. And then I'll end the segment with why women who experience sexual assault more often than not don't share their stories or report them to law enforcement. I'm Peter E. Watts, and you're watching Pro-Democracy News. Jeffrey Epstein was a serial pedophile and sexual predator who trafficked underage girls for sex. According to an FBI memo dated July 2025, Epstein harmed over 1,000 victims over several decades. Think about that, over 1,000 victims. While the FBI does not specify that Epstein himself sexually abused all of them, and it's true he was never criminally convicted of sexually abusing or sex trafficking all 1,000 victims, it doesn't take much to read between the lines that if the FBI is claiming that Epstein had over 1,000 victims, then many of those victims were part of his sex trafficking ring, whom he's abused, or other prominent people whom he had trafficked them to had abused them. Remember, this is the man that Donald Trump knew for 15 years and considered a close friend for 10 of those years. Trump once called Epstein a terrific guy who liked women on the younger side. Their close friendship likely spanned the time between the late 1980s or early 1990s and the mid-2000s. On September 20th, 2019, Savannah Guthrie sat down with 5 women survivors who accused Epstein of sexual assault. 3 of them were allegedly minors during the assault.
This is everything. The only solace for me is that when a group of people who've experienced trauma of this kind come together united against a common enemy, there's a very special bond between us all.
A painful bond shared among these 6 women sitting together for the first time for an exclusive interview with NBC News.
I find it very comforting to be here.
Marika Chartouni, Anushka DeGiorgio, and Rachel K. Benavidez sharing their stories about Epstein for the first time on television.
I think the nature of this kind of abuse means that you're conditioned to be silent, to be isolated, secretive, and shameful.
I feel like, it was a big game for him, and we were the pieces of his game.
And you're like, I'm just not going to say anything because that's what he told me to do.
The women all have familiar stories of grooming, promises, and then sexual assault.
I can relate to pretty much every person sitting here next to me.
Virginia Roberts-Giuffre says Epstein associate Ghislaine Maxwell recruited her one summer when she was working as a locker room attendant at Mar-a-Lago. In her first broadcast interview, Virginia tells NBC News what she has previously alleged in court filings, that Epstein directed her to also have sex with a number of powerful men, among them Britain's Prince Andrew.
He was an abuser. He was a participant.
Virginia says she was 17 when this photo was taken with the prince in Maxwell's London townhome, next to the bathroom where she says he sexually abused her.
In April of this year, Virginia Giuffre, one of the women in this interview, reportedly died by suicide, although other reporting has come out raising question to the cause of her death. Epstein wasn't the only one who's been accused of sexual assault. Trump himself has had at least 20 women come forward publicly to share their stories of assault. The first 19 names and images are taken from a 2024 Guardian article titled Sexual Misconduct Allegations Against Donald Trump, a Timeline. The 20th name was taken from a 2016 PBS article by Lisa Desjardins titled All the Allegations of Donald Trump Recapped. Kristen Anderson, E. Jean Carroll, Rachel Crooks, Amy Doris, Jessica Drake, Jill Harth, Kathy Heller, Karen Johnson, Nini Laaksonen, Jessica Leeds, Mindy McGilvray, Jennifer Murphy, Cassandra Searles, Natasha Stoyanov, Temple Taggart, Ivana Trump, Karina Virginia, Stacey Williams, Summer Zervos. The 20th woman went by the pseudonyms Katie Johnson and Jane Doe. According to the Guardian article, there were also 3 women who accused Trump of walking in on them while they were undressing at the Miss USA pageant that Trump owned. Tasha Dixon, Samantha Holvey, Bridget Sullivan. According to the PBS article, 2 teenage contestants at Trump's Teen Miss USA pageant also said Trump walked in on them in their dressing room while they were dressing. Mariah Bellotto, Victoria Hughes. Every one of these women's alleged experiences with Donald Trump involves its own unique pain and trauma, so to compare them would be inappropriate. However, there is one case that may perhaps be the most disturbing out of all of them. In April 2016, a woman going by the pseudonym Katie Johnson filed a lawsuit in California against Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein, alleging they had both raped her at Epstein's New York residence in 1994. The case was dismissed by a judge for technical legal flaws in the filing. The plaintiff filed a second case, this time with help from a lawyer in New York, using the synonym Jane Doe. The case has been called Jane Doe versus Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein. According to the court filing, plaintiff was enticed by promises of money and a modeling career to attend a series of parties with other similarly situated minor females held at a New York City residence that was being used by defendant Jeffrey Epstein. At least 4 of the parties were attended by defendant Trump. On information and belief, by this time in 1994, defendant Trump had known defendant Epstein for 7 years and knew that plaintiff was then just 13 years old. Defendant Trump initiated sexual contact with plaintiff at 4 different parties. On the 4th and final sexual encounter with defendant Trump tied plaintiff to a bed, exposed himself to plaintiff, and then proceeded to forcibly rape plaintiff. During the course of this savage sexual attack, plaintiff loudly pleaded with defendant Trump to stop, but with no effect. Defendant Trump responded to the plaintiff's pleas by violently striking plaintiff in the face with his open hand and screaming that he would do whatever he wanted. It goes on to say that immediately following this rape, defendant Trump threatened plaintiff that were she ever to reveal any of the details of the sexual and physical abuse of her by defendant Trump, plaintiff and her family would be physically harmed if not killed. Defendant Epstein had sexual contact with plaintiff at 2 of the parties. The second sexual encounter with defendant Epstein took place after plaintiff had been raped by defendant Trump. Defendant Epstein forced himself upon plaintiff and proceeded to rape her anally and vaginally despite her loud pleas to stop. Defendant Epstein then attempted to strike plaintiff about the head with his closed fists while he angrily screamed at plaintiff that he, defendant Epstein, rather than defendant Trump, should have been the one who took plaintiff's virginity before plaintiff finally managed to break away from defendant Epstein. The threats of violence against plaintiff and her family continued, this time from defendant Epstein, who again reiterated that plaintiff was not to reveal any of the details of his sexual and physical abuse of her, or else specifically plaintiff and her family would be seriously physically harmed, if not killed. While still under threats of physical harm by coming forward and having no reason to believe that the threats have ever been lifted or would ever be lifted, plaintiff, who has suffered from stress, emotional distress, mental pain and suffering, among other problems, ever since the assaults, was subjected to daily painful reminders of the horrific acts of one of the perpetrators, defendant Trump, via mass media coverage of him starting on or about June 16th, 2015, that over a short period of time became continuous and unavoidable. According to a 2016 Guardian article by Alan Uhas, one of her lawyers, Lisa Bloom, had set up a press conference in which the woman calling herself Jane Doe would give details about her upcoming case against Trump and Epstein. According to the article, after the plaintiff received numerous threats, her lawyer canceled the press conference. Think about that. There were people, perhaps powerful people, who didn't want this woman to move forward with her lawsuit, so they threatened her life. Let's put it in further perspective. It's 2016. Donald Trump is the Republican nominee for president. This case had the potential to affect public perception of Donald Trump when he ran for president the first time, but it was never allowed to move forward due to the threats on this woman's life. There have been critics who've suggested that all of these women who've brought allegations against Donald Trump simply made it up, and they give three common reasons. Number one, it was politically motivated. Number two, it was financially motivated. Number three, the time between the alleged assault and going public was too long. Let's deal with each of these one by one. The first reason has an air of credibility. It's true that it was just months prior to the 2016 presidential election, but the fatal flaw in this argument is that it presents an either-or scenario. Either it was politically motivated or it was motivated to hold Trump legally accountable for sexual assault that he actually committed. But why can't it be both? In fact, the woman using the pseudonym Katie Johnson and Jane Doe told the Daily Mail in 2016 that the reason she wanted to tell her story was to expose Donald Trump to stop him from becoming president. Notice she says her story. She wasn't making up a story in order to affect public perception. She was sharing her story in order to affect public perception so that Donald Trump would never have become president in 2016. It is possible to want justice, to want Trump to be held accountable, and for it to have a political motivation behind it. Both can be true at the same time. The either-or scenario is simply a flawed way of framing this question. Out of all the women who've accused Donald Trump of sexually assaulting them in the past, only 5 of those women, to my knowledge, have filed a civil lawsuit. 4 of those women ended up dropping their cases, and only 1 of them won a case, and that was E. Jean Carroll, when a New York jury found Trump liable of sexually abusing her in the 90s. Think about this. 20 women have accused Trump of either rape or some other form of sexual assault. Only 5 of them sued him in court. And out of those 5 women who filed a lawsuit, 4 of them dropped their cases for one reason or another. The Jane Doe case against Trump and Epstein was dropped due to threats of violence against her life. That, to me, says that the critics who are asking this question are asking the wrong question. The question we should be asking is, why didn't more of those women file lawsuits against Donald Trump? First of all, most women who've been raped or experienced some form of sexual assault don't share their experience publicly. If they do share it with a trusted friend or a group of friends, it is rare that they share their experience with law enforcement. And the reason they don't share it with law enforcement is that there is a culture within American law enforcement at all levels that do not believe victims of sexual assault. According to a 2020 article by NIH titled "Unfounded Sexual Assault: Women's Experiences of Not Being Believed by Police," it goes on to say this: 1 in 4 women will experience sexual assault in their lifetime. Although less than 5% of sexual assaults are reported to law enforcement, 1 in 5 cases reported to police are deemed baseless by police and therefore coded as unfounded. Police officers are in a unique position to act as gatekeepers for justice in sexual assault cases. given their responsibility to investigate sexual assault reports. However, high rates of unfounded sexual assaults reveal that dismissing sexual violence has become common practice amongst the police. Much of the research on unfounded sexual assault is based on police perceptions of the sexual assault, as indicated in police reports. Did you catch that? Less than 5% of sexual assaults ever get reported to law enforcement. That is staggering. If less than 5% of sexual assaults ever get reported, this means that just over 95% of women who are assaulted never report their experience to law enforcement. Think about that. Not only this, but of the 5% or just under 5% that do report their assault to law enforcement, 1 out of every 5 cases is deemed baseless and unfounded. In other words, only 4 out of 5 cases are believed. The article goes on to say the women in this study who experienced a sexual assault and reported the assault to police were hopeful that police would help them and justice would be served. Instead, these women were faced with insensitivity, blaming questions, lack of investigation, and lack of follow-up from the police, all of which contributed to not being believed by the institutions designed to protect them. The findings from this research demonstrate that police officers must gain a deeper understanding of trauma and sensitive communication with survivors of sexual assault, end quote. This is one of the reasons why women do not report sexual assault to law enforcement. Another reason they do not report their assault is that societal myths favor the belief that many women lie about assault and that rape only occurs to women who choose to live risky or chaotic lifestyles. According to a 2018 article in Fizz by Dr. David Schwartz titled "Delayed Reporting of Sexual Assault is No Reason to Discredit the Accuser," he says the data has always suggested that most women who survive sexual assault will never pursue justice against their attackers. My own clinical experiences were consistent with these findings. In some cases, transforming events eventually forced clients to come forward. In most of those cases, though, their reports were met with denial and skepticism. The reasons that many victims choose not to disclose their experiences have to do with the dynamics of trauma and sexual violence. Sex assault victims often experience overwhelming fear, pain, self-doubt, and shame. They find themselves embedded in a culture that commonly discounts their experiences and excuses the behavior of their assailants. They may continue to fear for their own safety and face real dangers if they come forward. To recap, survivors of sexual assault don't often come forward or report their experience because of the following reasons. Number 1, fear or concern that law enforcement won't believe them due to a culture of victim blaming. Number 2, fear that society won't believe them for the same reason. Number 3, the fear of their safety due to threats on their life. Number 4, the pain and trauma of the assault is relived and felt every single time they share their story. Let's end with this. The 3 reasons critics have given to discredit Trump's accusers simply do not hold up to scrutiny. I, for one, choose to stand in solidarity with these women. I refuse to dismiss their stories as the critics have done and as Donald Trump so recklessly has done. If you or a friend is a victim of rape or another form of sexual assault, please refer them to RAINN. RAINN is the nation's largest anti-sexual violence nonprofit. It provides 24/7 crisis support, prevention education, and public policy advocacy to help survivors stop harm and enable justice.